Welcome to the podcast where relationships, confidence, and determination all converge into an amazing, heartfelt experience. This is Speaking from the Heart.
Welcome back to episode number 163 of Speaking from the Heart. Now, we've been through a lot of challenging perspectives. We've been through a lot of different things that we've had to cover over the last few weeks. And even then, you might be having some very tough conversations with yourself or others that might not understand why you're feeling the way you're feeling, and you try to get it out, and you try to say your piece, and you try to work on your goals, and you try to make this meaningful progress, but all of a sudden, it's just stopping you in your tracks. It's making you feel horrible because these people that you've been trying to deal with, whether it's your boss, whether it's your significant other, whether it's friends, family, somebody else, it feels like every single time that you bring up this subject, you feel crud. You feel terrible inside of yourself. You feel like you are meant to be nothing to them. And you don't know why you keep having this feeling and why you keep reverting back to that feeling of worthlessness, not feeling good about yourself, probably feeling a little bit of shame, embarrassment, pain. Today's episode is addressing all those and so much more, dealing with the after effects of something that might be from a challenging dilemma that you might have faced recently. If there's anybody that's an authority on this subject, it would be me, your podcast host, Joshua D. Smith, founder and owner of Your Speaking Voice LLC, that has been through the ringer time and time again with challenging dilemmas, trying to figure out what's the best way to move forward. I can be here for hours telling you all kinds of different situations, but I know that I would put you to sleep. I only have about 20 minutes or less to get my point across. So let me try to do something that I will hopefully encourage you to think that everything will be okay. Stop thinking about it. Easier said than done, right? That's always what I've been told growing up. Stop thinking about it. Just put it aside. Don't let it be such a big deal. Well, if it was really such a big deal, we wouldn't be even recording this episode today, let alone even talking about some of the emotional appeal that takes place when it comes to feeling the way that we do. After we tried to figure out what went wrong, why are we having this feeling of ridicule, shame, disparagement? Whatever that feeling is, whatever that action verb that you want to do, whether you want to go punch a wall, punch a pillow, maybe even take that long walk that you usually don't take, and then you're sore in your muscles the next day. Trust me, I've done all those things and so much more. Even as an adult, I've even had to deal with some things that are not pretty. It's made me have to think about what is it that I'm ultimately thinking about when it comes to why I have this emotional reaction. Well, I'll tell you one thing. It's because you're human. We react because of the emotions that build up inside of ourselves. We're expecting something to happen instead. But even then, those feelings, the things that we often feel because we are really struggling with why that reaction happened the way it did with that conversation, that situation that occurred. But even with the things that are challenging, I think that it's really hard for us to be able to separate what we should have done, what we could have done, what has happened, what will happen in the future, because we're always stuck in the ways in which that emotion ties to it. It's something that even for the default response as a human being to a variety of different situations, we've had many conversations with many guests about why that energy, why that thought process, even by some trained psychologists that I've had on the show, to explain why this happens at various stages of our life. It doesn't mean that we're a bad person. It just means that we have this kind of residual effect. It's almost like when the ball is thrown, we're going to catch it. But sometimes when the ball is thrown, we're not going to catch it. Instead, we feel a sense of dread. We feel terrible about ourselves because we should have done something a little bit better. Maybe we could have handled it a little bit differently. But finding that we had this type of consensus, knowing that we were trying to challenge ourselves to think differently, But yet, at the same time this reaction instead occurred, it can be devastating. It can make us feel like we're a pile of shit. It can make us feel like we're fucking ridiculous. And I know I'm using swear words, but let's face it, it can be that visceral. We can be really tearing ourselves down, and we can be making ourselves feel like we can never escape from that bottomless pit that we have fallen. Now, after I have set the stage, you might be asking, well, how do I get out of this? How do I resolve these problems? How can I be more prepared for the challenging moments that will be happening in the future, especially if this type of situation is occurring? Let's be real. If I sat here and tried to explain every sort of circumstance that would ever occur in your life, this episode would be over 24 hours long. And even then, I would not even scratch the surface of what some other potential possibilities might occur. Because let's be honest, one of the things that we have to deal with when it comes to these situations is figuring out not only what are some of those triggers, but also what we can say instead. So let's run through a couple of pointers that might help you with preparing for something like this in the future, especially if you feel like the emotions are high. Now, this emotional state is something that we have even talked about in Crucial Conversations for Mastering Dialogue, but we haven't really dug underneath as to what those kinds of emotions are like, hence the reason for having this discussion today. Part of the way in which we can even start to think about how we can change our thoughts differently is to just simply write down, when somebody says this is what it makes me feel. You can probably think about even the most latest conversation that you had in which you had a disagreement with someone and think about what are some of the words, some of the phrasing that made you feel the way that you did. It could be something that was challenging you, pushing you aside, making you feel like you were worth nothing. But the part of the story that I really want to get into is why that emotional reaction happened. Write down all the emotions that are associated with what that phrasing was and how it was said so that we have a better picture of what we're working with. And by using the emotion wheel, which you can easily Google a resource like that online and use it to your advantage, start to write down all the emotions that associate with that phrasing. Nothing is off the table. If you have to repeat some of those emotions, feel free to do so. Now, with those emotions in check, let's push them aside for a moment and think about the context of what that statement that ultimately led you into the feelings that you had, how you can start to change that dialogue. For many people, being able to change that phrasing means that you have to understand the personality of what that person gave you. In other words, how was that received by somebody that was acting in a visceral way to create the emotion of having this challenging dilemma in the first place? I can't account for every single type of nuance, but for you, in general, what was it with that person that said the things that they said that could help you to break down why you had those emotions in the first place? In narrative form, I'm simply asking you to write down and explain why that feeling occurred. Now that you have all the emotions identified, start to write down what really made that trigger occur. If it was something in terms of the way it was said or that was provided in a nonverbal sense, write those sort of characteristics down. Think about how those things might have had an interference with the way in which it processed in your brain. After you do those two things, the last thing I want you to do is to write down what you would expect instead. If you ever had that thought come across your brain or had that situation come across from what somebody said ever again to you. In other words, I want you to think about what you would think differently about when someone says it that way. What are some things that might be some positive manifestations or maybe some more professional wording that would help you to calm down, calm that other person down, and to have a more productive conversation at the end of the day? Using that 3-step process, using the emotions, writing down why it made you feel the way you did, but also identifying what are some more healthier ways to address this situation can help you re-engage and come at it with a different type of perspective that otherwise you would have not had. Now, if you are struggling with this, try to find somebody that would help you and coach you through what it would look like to write down all these things. Maybe they can give you also an objective opinion and look at it from a different view or even a different type of lens. Because when we look at these types of situations, sometimes we have those rose-colored glasses on. And when we're covering ourselves with those rose-colored fashions, that might be hurting us. It might be even getting in our way of being able to overcome or even address that challenging dilemma. So now I have all those things written down. You are ready to take on this conversation. Or are you? You see, I've done this type of exercise before, and I've done it with all kinds of different thoughts in mind. The most biggest challenge that I've had is being able to now put it into practice. Being able to actually hear myself say those words out loud can be emotional interference in itself. It can push us back into having that state of flux, battling around, trying to figure out, flaring our arms and legs. Why do we have to do this? Almost like a little child having a temper tantrum. It's okay to feel that way. It's uncomfortable. It's something that we oftentimes feel when we are uncomfortable about a situation that we're presented with. But even then, what are some ways that you can practice this with somebody that would give you some objective feedback as to how you're approaching it and how you're making a difference by saying something different to them instead of the reaction that you had? Once you start to put this into practice, once you start to actually show what it looks like to have this kind of conversation with somebody else, you'll start to feel a little bit differently every single time that you rehearse. Some things are easier than others to overcome. And it's okay to think about what are some ways, what are some thought patterns that we can start to institute that would start to change that status quo. The way that we ultimately feel right now can ultimately change for the better as a whole. It means that we have to, though, examine if the emotional state has changed. Every time that you practice this, I want you to write down every single new emotion that you might have. Maybe there is a different phrasing that you're feeling. Maybe there has been a noticeable shift. That's where the power of journaling with this comes into mind and helps you to overcome those challenging dilemmas so that once and for all, when you're faced with that circumstance, you're able to keep moving forward, build that consensus, have that dynamic of that situation shift, and once and for all, you can stop being stuck in the after effects that we typically feel. Now, you might be asking yourself after hearing this great analysis and having this meaningful advice, Josh, I just don't feel comfortable about this. I feel really uncertain about whether this change will really happen. And I'm going to be honest with you. It might not happen. It might not be something that is easily done after one try. It might not happen after 2 tries, 3 tries. But I promise you that if you continue to stay with it, just like any sort of great thing, you can start to build a habit. Habits are great ways in which we can diffuse something that might have been really bad in the past, challenge the status quo of the present, but see what the envisioned future looks like by having a better habit that receives continuous feedback and allows us to have some perception of whether it's working or not. Regardless of the way in which you want to measure it, it's okay to not be perfect the first time. I wish as a child that I was told that, even with my own autism, because it would have made such a big difference to be reassured that even though I wasn't able to do that right the first time, it's okay to get back on. It's okay to have that pat on the back saying, Josh, you're going to be all right. Just keep going. Keep doing what you're doing. You're doing a great job. Because sometimes we need that reassurance. We need to know that we're doing the right thing. And sometimes doing the right thing means that we have to have a different perspective, even when that perspective might be something that is very hard to find in itself. Regardless of whether it's a coach, a friend, a family member that you trust, I promise you, if you put this into motion today, it will happen, whether it will happen tomorrow, whether it will happen the next day, a month from now, 6 months from now, even a year from now. It's all about building muscle. And in the muscle world, especially when it comes to our brains. Building that consistent positive habit can help diffuse what you might be feeling inside of yourself. I know that for many of us, we are faced with challenging dilemmas of all shapes and sizes. The circumstances that we might be faced with, the various situations, whether they're personal, professional, business related, all have different contexts. It means that we have to analyze, break down, showcase why it's so important to figure out how we can create better decisions, how we can not get stuck in these after effects. Because once we address the after effects, we can be better stewards of our own lives, being able to resolve problems at a moment's notice and stop holding ourselves back, thinking that we can't overcome the impossible. I know that for you and me, practice can be very tough. But in this ever-changing world in which we have to put in the hard work, if you're able to at least do that, if you're able to at least shift the needle forward, being able to even put the baby steps one foot in front of the other on these types of practices that I've showcased today, I know that you're going to be much better off. You're going to be much better in terms of your overall handling of the situation that you're facing. And oh yes, the thoughts that were once holding you back will ultimately disappear, looking like shadows of your former self and helping you to see what you're ultimately capable of becoming, which is something pretty darn spectacular, and knowing that you're no longer being held back by those limited beliefs, those limited things that have always been holding you back for so long. It would be pretty nice to see somebody that is very upright, confident, and very brave in being able to take on something that has been holding them back, but is now making them stand stronger, even more prouder than they ever had before. Thanks for listening to episode number 163 of Speaking from the Heart, and I look forward to hearing from your heart very soon.
Thanks for listening. For more information about our podcast and future shows, search for Speaking from the Heart to subscribe and be notified wherever you listen to your podcasts. Visit us at www.yourspeakingvoice.biz for more information about potential services that can help you create the best version of yourself. See you next time.